Well, first of all, I'm going to show what you ended up with, because you didn't have.
Oh, no pleasing some people.
Yeah, well, let's switch back over. So this is Tahl's amazing work.
So your frame cycle works.
Yeah, I know.
Unlike you.
Well, this is a quick time you're flipping DPX or something, but
yeah.
still. Oh, I didn't say that. Anyway, so this is what we've got right in here. Basic sky replacing, using a 3D dome. What I want to show is how to use some more 3D, but this time actually make a point of how to use that stuff for regular roto paint tasks as well, or even everyday comp tasks rather than very specific effects. That's something that I keep missing in production, where a lot of roto paint guys keyframe all day because they're not aware of the 3D, or they're not being lit or trained into the 3D. It's one of Nuke's biggest strengths, I think, really, using the 3D for really simple tasks to save yourself keyframing a lot. Because after all, we've got all this stuff that Tahl was showing here. We've got our render camera, and we've got the geometry. Basically, we've got the depth information, we've got the keyframe information. That's all we need to generate any sort of 2D track, really. So looking at this, we've got those cranes over here that don't really come along for the ride in the Luma key, and we'll just pretend we were going to get rid of them anyway. So I guess what you normally would do is create your Bezier. And
pays the hotkey for that.
I know.
Sorry.
I know. I'm just,
Oh, sorry.
I'm going to start kicking you now. Right. So coming from Shake, you'd probably take your Bezier and create a shape more or less accurate. Actually, that's actually, because we have faith in our tracking that's coming up. We'll redefine that edge of that roof here. We'll eat well into the gherkin. We'll restore the edge later. But let's just make sure that that Bezier really encompasses the entire stuff that we want to get rid of. Right, so now you'd probably do an inside or outside, well, in this case actually an outside. What I like actually using instead is a stencil mode, which is exactly the same as an outside, except it's got swapped inputs, which is quite handy, as we'll see in a second. So I know I'm going to connect the Bezier to an A input, this one to the B input of an upcoming merge. So I select this one first, A, stencils, B, hit M for merge, and I've got them connected straight away. Go to the operation in the drop-down menu here, go to stencil, down here, and all is good. Just to prove the point, if I connect A to my background and B to my mask and set the stencil to outside and switch between the two, same exact thing, except if I want to deactivate one of those guys, to see what it actually does, the stencil is giving me what I would expect, whereas the outside is like, yeah, right, this is great. But I actually was going to look at the plate. So anyway, I like keeping my main comp in input B and anything that modifies it in input A. And the merge operator has a lot of operations that are or seem redundant, like inside is the same as mask with swapped inputs, stencil is the same as outside. But it just helps you keep the flow of your comp the way you need it. So we've got the cranes cut out on one frame, but obviously nothing tracks yet. So actually, let's try to go to frame 200 and tweak the road a little bit here. I'll do the same nudging thing. Look at here. Using my number pad to nudge the keys here. Just those two now. And when I hold shift, it actually jumps in bigger steps, so I can do the rough work and then let go of shift and do the fine work. Go down. Now the nice thing about nudging, on top of what the fine control it provides, is you can hit O, as in toggle the overlays on and off. But when you have stuff selected and toggle the overlay off, they still work.
You can still
So you can actually see the RGB edge straight away without going like, oh, this bloody spline is exactly on top of what I'm trying to judge. So just select what you want to do, toggle off the overlay, nudge until you see what you want to see, and you're all set. Right, so what about the tracking? Let's grab the render camera, which is here. And because this has already been cloned before, as this little C on an orange background tells you, I turn on the expression links, you'll see that it's a clone in itself as well. So all those three render cameras are physically the same one. If one updates with a better camera track, all those render cameras in my shot are going to update, and I don't have to worry about going through all nodes and copy-pasting, and it'll just fall into place for me. So looking at the 3D, we've already learned about projections and all sorts of stuff, so I can actually go through that a bit faster, I guess. What I want to do is, I've got a bit of a representation here of that house in the background, what the cranes are sitting on. And I'm seeing this edge here that lines up exactly with with my 2D edge here, as Tahl was showing, and proving the point. So I'm just going to create a card node and scale it up into sort of our scene size and line it up to that house, and especially to the edge that our Bezier is sitting on. Well, that's not too bad. Like so. And doing the lineup trick, we've got the 3D in our buffer 1 selecting our 2D. Actually, this guy here, hitting Shift 2 this time because now we're all advanced. And locking the render camera, locking the viewport to the render camera, I'm sorry, and switching the wipe mode to over. So now I'm seeing the whole thing, and whoops, if I don't whack my keyboard on the way. Go back to our reference frame and make sure that the card covers the entire area that the cranes are on, because we'll slap the Bezier onto it, so we need to make sure that that we've got enough space for it to live on. So I'm going to move it up a little bit here, just like that, and just to be sure, we'll make it a bit bigger. Right. So we've got our card here now. That's another nice thing here. I'm not letting go of that node while I'm panning around. I just drag it and hit Alt to pan, let Alt go to drag the node, and keep going like this. So I don't have to drop the node and pan and pick it up again and pry it out of any sort of connections that I accidentally connected to by dropping it. So I've got the camera in the card now, and because we know that this is the match move camera of the plate, we can actually be sure that at our reference frame, this camera is lining up exactly to the geometry. As we see here, I'll just deactivate the card real quick. So we've got this track here. So we can take that render camera and copy it yet again. Well, actually, I'll just work with the one we've got and grab a new one later. We'll make a projection camera out of this render camera because we know it lines up with our plate right there, and we've lined up the Bezier to the plate. So now I can't just plug the Bezier into the card because it'll end up in the card's native texture space, which is probably not at all what you need to maintain this lineup that you created. So instead, we'll use the render camera and project the texture to make sure it falls exactly into the spot that we put it into. Now, because this is a clone, the first thing you want to do before you modify it in any way is declone it. So this has now converted this clone into its own unique instance of the camera, while the other two are still connected, and the C on the orange background is gone as well. So you want to do this to make sure that once you mess with this camera, you're not screwing up the camera elsewhere in the script. And another few things I like doing is just rename it projection cam. Oops. make that a capital C for readability. And I like changing the dark color as well, so it's easier to see where my cameras are. And since I've already recolored the actual node, the tile color, I'm not very good this afternoon, am I? There. I also like copying this over here, so I'm getting the same color in the OpenGL view. So now you can see I've got a blue camera that's actually sitting on top of another one, and this gray one here is a render camera. So they're still doing the same thing. They're not linked anymore, so I can mess with this blue one now. And what I really want to do is I just need this one single static projection. So I could just go in here in our projection camera, kill the animation at the current frame, yes, and yes. And now we'll see that we've got the blue camera sitting at our reference frame, which lines up perfectly at the frame that we lined up the Bezier to. And the render camera still does what it does. That's all good and would work, but what if I'm going to get a new camera and I've got to go through this whole process again? So rather than killing the animation, that's a bit destructive. I'm going to undo. And the way I would do this in production is actually using a very, very simple expression and a user knob to make it all a bit more generic and scalable. So I click anywhere in the panel here, go to Manage User Knob, and create an integer knob, because I just wanted to hold a frame number. The first name is the one you want to be using in subsequent expressions, and the label is just something descriptive. Can be anything really. Doesn't mean much other than telling the user what the hell this knob is about. So I hit OK, hit done. So I've created an empty integer. It's basically exactly, this step is very, very similar to how Shake works with user variables, I think it's called. It's been a few years I touched it. So I'm going to punch in my reference frame here, which is 200, and go back to the animation of my camera, and instead of killing the animation, I'm going to work with it as is. So I go into the expression, and you'll see the word curve in here, which is the expression that references the keyframes contained in that node. I don't want to get rid of it, I want to keep it. So I'm just going to use a set of parentheses to tell this expression to not use the entire keyframe curve, but only the value at the frame that our user knob is spitting out. Since this is not making no reference to XYZ in any way, I can just copy that and paste it into the other knobs. Hit OK. I'm going to do the same thing for the rotation here. Go into the expressions, paste that, paste, paste. So now we're back where we were when we actually destroyed the whole animation. But the nice thing is, if you go now to another frame and decide that your lineup would much better work on frame 100, I can now just go to my user tab, punch in frame 100, and my projection camera is going to be living right there.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to go, well, that didn't really, just killing the animation and projecting it and being done with it would have been much quicker. But once you've got it set up like this, in case you need to do another projection or another 50 projections or whatever, you can just copy the whole thing, paste it elsewhere into your script, change your reference frame, be done with it. So it is well worth putting a little bit of time and effort into these things, and you do it twice and you're really fast at it. So we've got the projection camera, we've got the texture, we select both because we want to, hit the right key, select both and combine them through a 3D projection. So I'll use the menus just for variety. Project 3D. So now that our static camera is projecting the Bezier, and we'll go back to reference frame. Yeah. And actually look at our scene. So now I'm going to lock the viewport to the render camera, not the projection camera. So now the Bezier seems to be living actually where we would expect it to be living. And it's tracking for us. So, and to double check that we're really doing the right thing, we're going back to our reference frame, looking at the input, which is really just the Bezier. And we're going to look at the rendered output of this card to really make sure we're not fooling ourselves here. Since Tahl set it all up for me, I'm just going to copy his render.
Use Alt-C.
Oh, it's Alt-C.
Alt-C, you know that one? No, if you use Alt-C, you don't have to actually copy and paste. You just, with one click, it does both.
Yeah, that works for one node.
Okay.
So I'll just copy his setup here, and I'm going to deactivate the Z blend mode because I don't need it for what I'm doing. Hook up buffer 2 to that, and now you see that it's not doing the right thing.
Gotta freeze the frame at 200.
I changed it to 200, went back to 200, there. So now you see that our input equals exactly the output. We're losing the bounding box, unfortunately. There's another feature request. Because it's gone through the 3D system. But we're getting the tracking for free. So that's cool. But hey, well, if you go through the shot, you'll see, damn it, we're actually somehow losing the top part of the shape. So let's have another look at the projection setup. By default, even though the OpenGL view for some reason shows it properly now, by default the projection node will crop the texture to keep it inside the camera cone. If you look at the blue camera here, the crop we see in the scanline render is exactly where the camera cone or camera frustum intersects the card, which produces this result. So if I just uncheck crop, we're good to go. And we'll connect our A input of the stencil to the scanline render output, and that should track now. So now we just have to restore the edge of the Gherkin building on the left side. I'm going to stop cracking jokes about it now. I've done it for 2 weeks. Thanks to Matt, I've got a nice geo representation of the building. So I'm just going to use that in my 3D scene down here. And I could give it an alpha channel and copy that setup and render an alpha channel for myself because your TD is busy or can't be bothered or whatever. But another cool thing to manage this, because you basically just want to render this geometry to hold out the edge of the building here, we can combine the two into a scene. And there is this cool little shader called Fill Matte. Unfortunately, it's nowhere to be found in the standard shader menu. So a nice thing to do is actually check out the All Plugins menu here. So if you go to All Plugins and you'll go like, yeah, how the hell am I supposed to know that? Well, just have a look.
Just ask Frank.
Browse it around. Don't trust the default set of things. And at the same time, there's a lot of things in here that you really shouldn't be using. So fingers crossed.
Can of worms, dude. Can of worms.
We'll see how this is going to go. Okay, Fill Matte is basically a holdout shader, really. So if I'm going to plug this into the geometry here and look at the output. And now we've got, it's holding out already by default, but it's also drawing into the alpha channel. So if we go into the Fill Matte shader and give it the same channel set to affect as our objects or textures that we want to hold out, it's now going to hold out RGB and A, but it's not going to show up as a solid alpha channel. So that's that. So we've restored the edge now, and now you're going to say, well, yeah, but the quality sucks. Well, there's various ways of dealing with this. We can use Roy's fancy matrix, or you can use edge blurs, or you can use the multisample and crank that up a little bit. Now, the multisample obviously is going to introduce motion blur, really. So that's not really going to give us much control over the edge. So if we set the shutter to 0, you can actually use the multisample to control the quality of your object edges. And if you then need to apply motion blur on top of that, you can either use a vector blur, which is only using the render camera, or you'll use you can use a brute force time blur node, which is on top of that. Whatever comes in, it'll be multi-sampling that. So now we've got both going. And we've got that little setup, which, again, might have taken a bit longer than just quickly killing the animation and projecting it, but now you can take the whole thing and copy it elsewhere and reuse it.
That'd be a good case for the auto backdrop.
Shut up.
Sorry.
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So that's the script here. We've got the sky and we've got the holdout. You can see there's still this antenna flashing on and out, in and out, so you can do the same trick to get rid of that or any other stuff that you might want to remove. Just to shut up Tahl.
Thank you.
Cool. So now looking at this whole thing as is, if we compare it to our previous, well, to our input, we're replacing the sky. Nice, looks all nice and much better. But what about the reflections? Let's have a look at how you could do a reflection or a possible solution for this. I'm going to go in. The problem with reflections, obviously, you could corner pin some random stuff into it. But the main problem with reflections in 2D is that it shows you something that's behind, well, in this case, it's behind the camera or off screen, or it's not really any data in your frame that you could use for this. But since in this case, we've got a nice 360 sky dome, we do have the data that should be used for that reflection. So let's use it. I'm going to copy that scanline render node again and hook it up. But this time, I'm going to go in. Actually, I don't really need this anymore. I'm going to close this pane for now. But instead of rendering through a render camera, I want a spherical unwrap of the entire scene. So I'm just going to pop it into spherical mode. And this produces a spherical texture of whatever 3D scene is coming into it. Now, because a spherical texture represents 360 degrees horizontally and 180 degrees vertically, it should always be rendered in a 2:1 aspect. So I'm just going to plug in a node here. I like using the reformat node. You can really use any node that has a format passing downstream. And this is going to override the scanline render output's resolution, which defaults to the project settings. I think you showed that in your demo, right? So in the reformat node, you could use a crop node, you could use a constant node, whatever. I like the box option in the reformat node. So once you set it force to shape, you can just punch in the output resolution that you expect the scanline renderer to produce. So let's start with an 800 by 400, which is pretty low, but we can always come back and bump it up later. And maybe to make it a bit more efficient, because we know this is not going to be moving, we'll use a crop node, which in Nuke is as well a crop node and also what Shake is calling a set DOD. Mm-hmm. So initially a crop node will set the bounding box, which is what set DOD does in Shake. And once you hit the reformat, that's when it becomes what Shake would consider a crop node. But in this case, I just want to optimize my render. I don't want to change the format, so I'm just assigning a new bounding box to get rid of that 1/3 of data that I really don't want to be bothered with.